Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest In Conversation. We're sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we are once again in conversation with Stefano Baronci. He's the Director General of ACI Asia-Pacific. Stefano, welcome back. Good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to see you as well.
Stefano, you've been on the road a lot lately. I think last time we spoke in June. Things are actually looking up a little bit for airports, airlines. Borders are reopening. Cambodia is open. We were talking about that just before the show. Vaccinated travel lanes are being put in place. Singapore has been talking about that. And then Omicron comes along. It's a great name, but it's a bad variant, apparently, or maybe not. We don't know yet. Science is, as of today, December the 1st, the scientists are still trying to figure that out. But there have been some closures, Japan, Israel. But then again, the virus is in Japan. I don't know that Israel's confirmed any cases. Japan has. But even places that close down traffic from South Africa or Southern Africa, the virus is showing up. What's the reaction from ACI Asia-Pacific, and what's in store for Asia's airports?
Well, the reaction, of course, is a matter of concern, because we will have to see what the real impact of these new variants of concern has on the industry, on the capacity of people fundamentally to travel. But we have also to keep calm and see how things will go. November has been, as you said, a very intense month. We started with very positive signals in a region like Asia-Pacific, which started very slowly to reopen, where still 70% of the countries ban or restrict access for international passengers who are not residents. In a region where a quarantine is still applied by about 70% of the countries, even for fully vaccinated passengers. The fact of having, as you reminded, Cambodia, Thailand, following Maldives, Singapore, Fiji coming soon in December, planning to reopen without quarantine for fully vaccinated passengers, was a very good signal. And I think it's still a very good signal. We are entering into an additional transition, let me say. We are used to transitioning, that through the Omicron has, of course, impacted the decision of the policy makers. Now, the reality is that we based our protocols on science, and science hasn't provided a definitive response to the danger of this virus. We still think that the protocols that are in place allow for detecting, the problem and taking the measures which are appropriate. For sure, the decision of fully closing the borders is not the right way to manage these transitions, and this has been restated by the WHO in its advice just issued yesterday, that this kind of measures will not produce the effect which is hoped, meaning the spread of the virus. Media in Europe are already reporting that the Omicron was already there 10, 11 days before announced in South Africa. So if that is the objective, it's not by closing the borders fully that we can avoid the risk.
Well, I mean, and that, obviously goes into my next question, but it seems like governments kind of, I mean, you can see their point on the one hand, but on the other hand, the virus doesn't respect borders. And and by the time they discover it, as you just mentioned, I mean, it actually was circulated. Was it the Netherlands? Is that correct?
It was, yes, Netherlands,
Yeah.
Spain, and also Spain is reporting that there may have been cases already in the country. And as you can see, many other countries now in Europe have several cases. So it means that something has happened probably even before we could learn it publicly.
Well, and I was watching the news, Dr. Fauci in the U.S., he's saying it's probably already in the U.S. circulating. Canada has a confirmed case and all of that. So, that's my point. I mean, as I just talked about, things were looking up, borders were reopening, vaccinated travel lanes, whatever you want to call it. And then all of a sudden the governments, to me, they kind of overreact and they're shutting down travel again. And I don't see what the point is because the virus is already spreading.
Yes, and as I said, I think, of course, I always try to put myself in the shoes of policymakers, of politicians. It's a very difficult job they have at the moment to take these decisions, the right decisions. Following and complying with the international standards, with the authorities that are responsible for guiding them is essential. WHO is advocating in respect of, again, of not closing the borders. There is a set of measures from the testing at departure or at arrival, wearing masks, using PCR also to sequence the kind of virus that is detected that allow to quantify the risk and take precautions immediately. So I guess this should be the line to follow still. That doesn't mean, of course, that the protocol may be reviewed, but this should be done on real evidence and conclusive evidence, and we do not have them yet. It will be probably for 2 more weeks to wait for 2 more weeks.
Well, you talk about tests, and it's interesting because I wanted to ask you about this. You've been traveling a lot recently. I think currently you're in, is it Abu Dhabi?
Abu Dhabi, yes.
Currently you're in Abu Dhabi. What's been your experience with or the passenger experience? You fly commercial, I'm sure.
Yes.
And so obviously you have to take multiple tests, pre-departure, on arrival, wherever you're going. My wife is currently traveling. She's been in the U.S. She's been in Paris. She went to Helsinki to visit a relative. Yep. So now she's back in France. But I had to kill a lot of trees to print out the various forms for Europe, the U.S., things like that. The vaccination forms, the QR codes, and all of that. I mean, I had to print out multiple copies just in case. Yeah. What's been your experience, and what can, even, let's put Omicron aside for a minute, but what is the passenger experience right now?
Well, it's a mixed feeling. On the one hand, it's beautiful to travel again. I was very, very happy to do so. I really felt, I had a feeling of freedom. And it was like going back to business as usual, being able to do business, meeting people, having meetings, doing, having the time during my spare time to visit a museum, visit finally my relatives. So this is certainly positive. On the other hand, we cannot deny that the protocols which have been put in place have additional requirements that are challenging, both for the operators and for the passengers. So 78%, according to our survey, 78% of the airport, the countries that we have surveyed apply double testing. First of all, 70% of the countries have not introduced a digital app yet. Almost 70% of the countries use paper only. When you go to the airport, we have quantified at the moment, it takes between 2 to 6 minutes, additional minutes, to make the health identification check. And in addition to this, checks for the same documents in most of the cases are done 2 times, so are repeated 2 times. So this gives you a sense of the complexity and make you think that we can still manage it at this time because the volumes are relatively modest. So 75% of the traffic that we had in 2019 has not materialized yet. What will happen when the volumes will get back? And there is pent-up demand, so the demand will be there. The answer is it will be very important that we put in place measures that are proportional to the risk. And also we abandon the ones that at the moment are in place but may not be necessary.
Well, and that, I mean, you talk about the paperwork and the extra amount of time. I think we've talked about that before. And I spoke with someone at Affinity here in Singapore the other day about the IATA Travel Pass and the Commons Pass. They provide some of the technology that involves there. There's a lot of apps out there that are available, and that's kind of the problem. There's sort of too many apps that operate on different standards, and I don't really understand that now. We're 2 years into this, and when I started traveling, and again, we talked about this before, but when I started traveling overseas, you had the yellow card with your vaccination status for hepatitis, yellow fever, or whatever. WHO approved, it was one standard card, standard size, so on and so forth. Why are we still without a common standard for these kinds of testing and vaccination apps that will cut down on the processing time? Because we have seen where when countries reopen travel, I mean, there's huge pent-up demand, and the airports are not going to be able to process people efficiently. I mean, there's going to be a lot of late flights simply because you can't process all that paper.
Absolutely. No, I think that the decision has to be taken by states, and the states have to approve all the tools that you have mentioned. Now, the coordination of ICAO is important, but as you know, multilateralism at this time is not a fashionable word. So the fact is that we can see improvements and there are still incremental improvements. I could say that the process is still a bottom-up one, not a top-down. If we have seen since we talked last time some improvements, but we can count the number of states that have approved, for example, recognized the IATA Travel Pass. And I'm happy to say that most of them are in the regions that I represent, particularly in the Middle East, in addition to Singapore. We expect states to go faster in taking this decision for sure, because otherwise papers will not be the solution. And again, I stress 70% of the airports that we have surveyed, and there are the most of them that we represent, say it's still paper. So when we go and meet to the Ministry of Transport, Civil Aviation Authorities, and also Ministry of Health, we always stress this point. I think that is the objective that they have to aim at, because it's now the time, taking aside Omicron for a second, to look how to improve the process and not congest it as it likely will be when traffic gets back.
Well, I know exactly what you talk about when you mentioned the multilateral, institutions and things like that. When I lived in New York and was going to graduate school, I covered the United Nations, and it's a tough operation. Obviously, you represent airports. Let's talk about airports. Operations in places like the U.S. We could talk about China, although that China seems to be stop and start a little bit, depending on outbreaks, although the domestic traffic seems to be picking up. Places in the U.S., again, the pin-up demand obviously is there. There's lots of people flying. in places in Europe, in the U.S. In the U.S., Thanksgiving seemed to be okay. Here in Asia, airports, though, are still hurting. My wife mentioned that when she was leaving Singapore, it wasn't exactly a ghost town, but it was close. And let me ask you a question. We've seen things happen for example, the U.S. When the pickup in demand happened, a lot of the airlines really weren't ready because they'd laid off a lot of people. Yeah. Pilots, crew members, things like that. Are the airports in the same position? I mean, if and when here in Asia, for example, when we do see a pickup in demand, when borders are reopened, depending on what happens with Omicron, but are airports ready? Are they staffed up? Are they ready to go?
Airports are generally ready from my talks with them, with my members. Of course, there are some issues, for example, in terms of ground handling. As you know, ground handling is a business that depends a lot on seasonal contracts, and they have been hugely affected by the crisis. So the workforce is not always there. So this brings us, in my opinion, to the key critical point: predictability, having an understanding of the decisions or the plans of states to reopen. If this is done in advance, in consultation with the industry, airlines and airports, both have the capacity to take care of it. If this happen overnight, then the challenge is much higher. Of course, some countries have already trained. Have already, reviewed the process because domestic traffic has, to a large extent, get back to a level which is satisfactory. So that is already for India, for Australia, in Japan, and it was, and also in China. Just to give you some example, Malaysia has also reopened in the domestic traffic, without all the requirements that were needed for a long time. So the traffic is there, and as you know, the key component of several countries is domestic traffic. So I'm confident that this is an issue that can be addressed, but again, we need to continue to. We talked about Japan, the fact that.
Yeah, Stefano, I lost you there just for a minute. And again, this is why we need to travel. This is a perfect example, but I lost you there for a minute. Okay. But keep going, keep talking about what you were talking about. I just want to explain to our viewers we had a little break there.
Yeah, so thank you. Japan is a country that has decided to close the borders very, very quickly with international traffic. And of course, we expect Japan also to be fast in reopening. If it does so, is secured.
Okay. Stefano, we need to take a quick break here. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're in conversation with Stefano Baronci, the Director General of ACI Asia-Pacific. Stefano, we're going to switch gears for a minute. Again, we've discussed this before. Airports, airlines, everybody in aviation wants to go green. Sustainability is the corporate buzzword du jour. I think I saw a new report from ACI APAC recently came out, said airports were doing a lot better. Give us an idea of what the situation is with airports in Asia-Pacific and sustainability, the environment.
Yeah, so October and November have also been very, very important months for environment, for the engagement of states and industries to look into it. And of course, what happened in Rome and Glasgow with the COP26 is an important political signal, which was preceded or followed by some countries in Asia pledging to reach net zero emission by 2050. It's important to remark that some of these countries are key aviation markets. Big economies like Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, just to mention some of them. There are some other countries that set this target with a different time frame. So, for example, Saudi and China targeted in 2060, and India in 2070. Now, this is an important background to consider for our industry as airports, but I think that in respect to this, we have to showcase that the industry can be faster in doing it. And there are already some airports that, like Delhi and Sydney, that have pledged to set the target of reaching net zero emission by 2030. So there is a lot that the association can do in terms of not simply educating, the parties to learn from each other, from best practices, but also to continue the dialogue with the authorities, because this is a partnership. We can win only if everybody plays his part.
I want to talk about, I always tell my son, money makes the world go round, and he asks me a lot of the times, he's asking me why is some government doing this and why is some person doing that, and I always tell him, it's all about the money. And I'm curious about this. Airports, I think they do, everything that I've read and from what I've seen, airports are really doing a good job on sustainability. We're seeing lots of moves in that area. But do they have the money right now to spend? They've lost hundreds of billions of dollars to COVID. Is it the time for them to be spending that capital right now?
It is the time. It is the time for sustainability, but also for looking at what will be in the medium and long term the trend. Now, of course, we are in a kind of triage mode at the moment, and in order to survive. But beyond it, we don't have to forget what has been the demand over the last 20 years. We don't have to forget some macroeconomic.
And I lost you again.
Marge.
Oh, that's okay. We lost you again. Again, another reason exactly why we need to travel again, so we can have this conversation in person.
So, as I said, some macro indicators such as the demographic dividend, the GDP growth, the margin of propensity to fly. We don't have to forget the fact that until 2019, the huge problem in Asia, in many countries, was congestion. Not just on the ground, but also in the sky. So if we wait and prolong decisions for later, for tomorrow, we may not be able to address the problem of sustainability and meeting the demand of the people to travel. Infrastructure are not elastic, so you need time to build them. And of course it takes its plans are made in the long term. Investment will have to be taken. Simply the building a green infrastructure has an additional cost. but the savings, according to the estimations, are higher in the long term than the cost, that startup cost, fundamentally by 8-9%. And we have measured this especially for greenfield airports. So an airport like Beijing Daxing has set its infrastructure design
and we have. Well, same thing. That's okay. I was actually going to say, wow, when we first started talking, I was going to say, wow, the Abu Dhabi Wi-Fi is really good, but maybe not.
No. So can I tell me when I come?
Sure. No, just keep talking about You were talking about Beijing and all that.
So Beijing, and you were asking. Well, you may wonder why some airports are moving faster than others. Have plans that are more ambitious than others. It's because sometimes, in some cases, access to renewable energies, for example, is easier. Delhi estimates that through renewable sources of energy, they will be able to address 75% of the future emissions. Of course, in some other countries, this is not possible. But at the end of the day, what will really make the difference is the decarbonization of the electricity grid. And this is something that airports cannot control, something where really states, authorities have to put investment in.
Stefano, we're running a little bit short on time, and the glitches in the Wi-Fi don't help. I'm going to combine a couple of questions and to take us out. ACI APAC recently released a report, talked about the amount of spending over the next 20 years to keep up with demand. And I'm going to combine this, give us an idea of that outlook. And then also, my question is, do we need all these airports? Because, and it goes back, it's a little bit related to the environment, because when you talk about a new greenfield airport, we're talking about hundreds of hectares. We're talking about, maybe putting it in a place where there was no airport before. It's virgin land, if you want to call it that. But do we need all that? Do we need all these airports? At what point do we say, okay, enough's enough?
Well, I think that some of the points that I mentioned for the topic of sustainability are absolutely valid for your answering to your question. Again, the highest level of populations are in the countries in Asia. The propensity to fly will increase because it's still in its infancy in many countries, and will follow the demographic dividend, the capacity, the disposable income that is increasing for a larger portion of people in these years and in the coming years. The fact that airports were congested, were eternally in a catch-up mode like in India, means that as soon as this crisis will be mitigated to a point to become structural but also manageable, the people will request the time slots for traveling. And there is no substitution to air travel. In many countries, it's not like in Europe where you can more easily substitute high-speed train with airlines with high-speed trains. So my view is that for a long-term investment, who is in a capacity to do it should do it, because it will find itself in a stronger competitive position than the others. And we know, the market show very clearly that the supply goes where there is the capacity to do so. Several countries have confirmed their capex plan in Asia, and it's not by chance that this is happening.
Stefano, last question. We've got to close the show out here. As you know, I try to end these on a bright note, and actually things were looking a bit brighter. As we
Yes.
in November, and then all of a sudden Omicron rears its ugly head. Barring a complete cure or a super vaccine that covers everything, what can the Asian airport world look forward to as we head into the new year?
Well, I think that the saying "keep calm and carry on" is still a very valid advice under the current circumstances, a very challenging one, where booster of uncertainty is replacing the booster of vaccination that should really be the focus. Airports in Asia, as much as in the Middle East, are continue to advocate for risk-based measures. COVID has demonstrated to be very, very effective in separating people. We have to avoid situations like the ones that we have experienced over the last few days of putting walls up and closing borders without justifications. My view is that the positive trend will continue if, again, we can get the evidence that the tools that we have in place are still up to the task.
Stefano Baronci, Director General of ACI Asia-Pacific, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much, Matt.